Good morning and welcome once again. Here we are. It is the end of the year. I hope that you've had a great 2025 and I look forward to seeing what God is going to do in 2026. I also hope you had a great Christmas. I know we did here in my home, and it's great to be with family. It's great to be with friends, and I look forward to just more time spent together with family this coming week. As I said, here we are at the end of another year, and we're preparing as part of the end of season to look back at the past 365 days and reminiscing, maybe even going through photos of what happened this past year and just reminding ourselves of the many blessings that God had sent our way, even in the midst of difficulties, the many times that God stepped in and fixed whatever the issue was or got us through. And then we look forward to what is going to be our next year. What's going to happen over the next 365 days? We have really no idea, but we just ask that the Lord looks after us and gets us through. And again, that we get to spend time with family, time with friends, time learning about the Lord more. All around the world at this time of year, people are preparing to celebrate New Year. Some will come together with family and close friends in intimate gatherings in their homes, while others will join the countless masses at various venues around the world. Whatever one's preference, we recognize the significance of the occasion, what it means to be celebrating a new year. Now, being this is the last Sunday of the year before the new year, I thought it would be appropriate to consider the significance of the biblical support for the holiday, being that God has ordained many festivals, and we take a time in the year to recognize God for what he has done. Our God, our Father, is the God of festivals, the originator of celebrations. And to borrow a phrase from Charles Dickens, he is the founder of the feast. Now, you might be thinking, where in the Bible does God talk about celebrating the new year? Well, it's not so much that he refers to any specific holiday we choose to celebrate, but it's the idea that he gave instructions to Moses for his people to follow regarding his appointed festivals. Those sort of things that we find in Leviticus chapter 23. We, as believers, celebrate Christmas and Easter as the most significant of Christian holidays, even though God gave no instructions for believers to do so. But he did tell us to not forsake the episunagogen, which is it's a word that means the complete collection that is kept in one place. And oddly enough, it's the word that we have come to use to represent a gathering of believers. But isn't that a great word, that we are a complete collection? We are God's collection. And we can read about that in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 25. But he also reminds us with these words, do this in remembrance of me. We are called to come together on a regular basis to break bread in Luke chapter 22, verse 19, and to celebrate with one another, whether we're celebrating what Christ has done for us in our celebration of communion, or Easter, or Christmas, or even the New Year when we're taking the time to remember what God has done for us. So let us reflect on what Jesus told his followers. If you really knew me, you would know my Father as well. And what he said to his disciples, if you had known me, you would have known my Father also. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. We read that in John chapter 14, verse 7. God has given believers his word that we may learn more about Jesus, his son, where he went, what he did, who he dealt with, his friends, his enemies, all in an attempt to that we can understand him, and that we might truly reflect on Christ in our Christian walk. But as an additional benefit, as we get to know Jesus better, we deepen our understanding of God, who he is and what he wants us to be, how he wants us to live, and to recognize him as a loving Father. Now, with that being said, let us examine this passage in Leviticus and what it meant to Jesus growing up as one of God's chosen people and observing the rules and the rites and the rituals. In Leviticus 23, it begins with God giving instructions to Moses on the observance of God's appointed days. He gives Moses days and dates, and in verse 3, when he appoints the seventh day as the Sabbath, a day that we are told it is a day of no work, from which we get the English word sabbatical, that's the root. But God gives instructions on what the people are to do, or in this case, what they're not to do. No working. In the 12th chapter of Matthew, Jesus enlightened the Pharisees on the adherence to the appointed day of Sabbath, a day of no work. But the designation of these appointed days was part of God's setting a people apart for himself, establishing a covenant with them. Adherence to a code of behavior and adherence of days as appointed by God as sacred were part of what was required by the people. Now, with the birth of Jesus, a new covenant would be established. But some of the appointed days came with this additional statement. This is to be a lasting ordinance for the generations to come wherever you live. We read that in Leviticus chapter 23, verse 31. There is no doing away with certain festivals. And as a child, Jesus would have observed all of these festivals. And that's what they became known, the feasts. He would have rested on the Sabbath, not as much as the Pharisees would have liked, but he rested. We know that he observed the Passover in Jerusalem. We have the account of what happened when he was 12 years old and was left to teach in the temple, accidentally left. And on the night that he was betrayed, he shared in one last Passover meal with his followers, which we read that in Luke chapter 22, verse 7. So of all the appointed days mentioned in Leviticus, however, there is one festival that stands out. It's the Festival of Trumpets. It's a memorial with clamor. There is an acclamation of joy in it, especially with trumpet blasts. God does not say what they are to be remembering, but just to take the time to remember and to be happy about it. This festival in the Jewish tradition is called Yom Teruah, and it is celebrated at the end of the fruit harvest. It is also known as Rosh Hashanah, and it has been celebrated by God's people since first appointed, way, way back in Moses' time. And to this day, it is still celebrated. This year coming in 2026, it will run from the September the 4th at sundown until sunrise on September the 6th. Now, Jesus would have taken part in the festivities of his days. He would have celebrated Rosh Hashanah. And this included all the parts, the singing, the dancing, the eating of sweet fruits. Apples dipped in honey are fantastic. And not to be forgotten, but they would also blow the shofar, a ram's horn. In Jewish tradition, the ram's horn signifies God supplying a sacrifice in place of Isaac, who Abraham was willing to sacrifice. It's a significant moment when the horn is blown. The horn is also blown to awaken those sleeping. Now, both sleeping physically and those who are asleep spiritually, who have fallen asleep, who are not taking recognition of God, who are not in that relationship he wants them to be in. They're just going through the motions. It is to announce the arrival of the King. We know when Christ returns, it will be with the blast of a trumpet, and it will be heard around the world. For 10 days following Yom Teruah, the shofar sounds and calls all worshipers into a time of introspection, examining their hearts and lives for misdeeds and transgressions, and then coming before God and asking for forgiveness for those things, knowing that our God is a God who forgives. These are the days of repentance that God calls for. So, as we are heading into our new year, the similarities shared with the God appointed Yom Teruah are not to be overlooked. We might celebrate the end of this year with some singing, some dancing, a lot of reminiscing. We're going to eat special foods. We are going to have our noisemakers and make all sorts of noise. We'll even make resolutions. We'll say that these are the things that we are going to do better in our new year. But perhaps we should take the time in the midst of our celebrating and reflecting to remember the moment when God moved in our lives. And there are many, I'm sure, if we just take the time to think about it. So give God the glory, celebrate God in all you do in this coming New Year's celebration and even throughout 2026. The Hebrew words for have a good year are Lashana Tova. And let me close with Psalm 81, verse 1 to 3. Sing aloud to God our strength. Shout for joy to the God of Jacob. Raise a song, sound the tambourine with sweet lyre, with the harp. Blow the trumpet at the new moon, at the full moon, on our feast day. Have a wonderful new year. God bless.